Hi, and welcome to today's edition of Chat with Chet. So, just as a heads up, today is going to be a bit of a shorter session trying to catch a webinar that I happen to inevitably back up against because there's so many going on right now. So, we're going to take things a little bit fast today. Luckily, this is a nice bite sized topic. We'll look at the way that we deal with both tracks and a device inside the sky to move it from one project to another. So there's a couple reasons that you may want to do this. One of which involves that we need to all be working on separate projects and then combine our work together. So this will allow us to work on individual tracks and bring them into the same project. Another one is for those who like to work with, say, a MIDI controller or an OSC device, you can actually just pull the pieces of that and transport it from project to project so you don't have to rebuild it every time. So we'll look at the two of those today. And let's go ahead and let's pop over to take a look at what we're doing. All right. Oh dear. Let me fix that because it's looking at the wrong desktop. That's very exciting to see. Oh, jeez. There we go. Almost like we planned it. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm popping into an old project I have, one of the first ones I did after I left Disguise, which is We Live in Cairo from ART. So we're going to just open this project up. And I should move the pieces from this project into a separate kind of default test project because I keep using this one for everything, and I should just clean up my workflows. Great, here we go. So this is We Live in Cairo. It was a fairly simple, let me throw on the grids because I want to talk about this show. So this was a fairly simple project. 10 projectors. We have 3 that did the back wall on a blend using the 0.38 lenses from Epson, which were a fun adventure. 2 doing this floor piece down here. Yep, that floor. And then there's a front of house projector that did this brick wall here. There was also a tint that came up. We thought about using this header and then abandoned it. So a bunch of different options. And then 4 projectors were actually on the floor projecting up onto these tints, which required a lot of work to map. So it was a decent sized show, lots of outputs that we were dealing with. And one of the things that we wanted to do was control the dowsers of the projectors that are internal to them. So we usually do that in D3 through DMX. As you can see here, I've got shutter controls for the Christies because the Christies were an older model and didn't have the right ArtNet implementation. And then we also used DMX control to adjust the projectors. Brightness, shutter open, close. So let's go into the track that we're going to use to export this. So if we come over here to my PJ ArtNet control, I just have these 2 DMX layers. And really, all the layers are doing, this is my Panasonic layer that has every command for Panasonic. Ditto for the Epson layer, which has all of the Epson. So over here in the DMX commands, basically, these are either a 12 or 16, I believe, is the Epson channel DMX device. So we build them all out. I usually skip so that every 20 channels is my next one. Gives me a little bit of space to work with, and it means that I always use the same scheme for everything. So you can see here we've got brightness, shutter close, shutter open, power off and on because you can control that as well. Many of them have a lock command that you'll have to send as well as the command so that the lock tells it to listen to ArtNet, and then you can control the values you want. the Barcos have the most maddening implementation of it, because you can either just close or open the shutter, or you can douse the brightness using DMX values, only to 30% brightness, and then close or open the shutter. But the problem that one faces with that is, yes, you can do it that way, but the zoom and the lens position are all part of that as well. And so you have to make sure to toggle those off before you turn on the ArtNet, otherwise it homes the lenses. You could set them all using DMX and send that the whole time, but I get really nervous about doing something like that, because if you mess it up, you're going to back yourself into a corner. So what we're going to want to do is take this whole track, which will have these two layers in it, and give us all of these commands. So to export a track, what I'm going to do is right-click on the header, and then right-click on the header again. This is where we can rename or duplicate it if we want. What we want to do is actually export it. And so look at the pop-up that we get when we export. It tells us it's been exported to output folder and then the name of it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take that object and put it in the packages folder in our new project to import it. But before we do that, let's also go ahead. I made a test MIDI device, but I'm going to make a new one. We'll call it MIDI Template. Its type is going to be a MIDI device, which gives us this. So what I'm going to do is make the layout of a typical Korg Nano controller, which is something that I see kicking around a lot that people like to use. So if we right-click on the top here in this MIDI template, I can rename, duplicate. I could export it right now, which doesn't do us any good because nothing's built to it yet. So if we go to Edit, that's where we can do some fun work. So we can set the MIDI in and MIDI out channels. That's not going to do us any good because I don't actually own a Korg Nano controller, which I'm kind of embarrassed to admit. Should probably put on a Christmas list at some point. But what we need to do is build the control sets for it. So I'm going to click this plus sign once, and it's going to give me a MIDI control set, which will set to the type dial. And we'll just add in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 dials there. So you can see we're starting to build out the template. Again, right-click on this one. This is going to be our sliders, and we'll add 8. And then we're going to do 3 sets of note buttons. One, 2. Just deselect that because we don't need that selected. And note button 3, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, the next step for this would be if we had an actual MIDI controller, I would go ahead and right-click this and choose Train and move that on the controller so that we train all of it. We're not going to do that today, however, because we just don't have a MIDI controller to train off of. That's a really quick way to make sure that everything's patched. But what we will do is go ahead, right-click on it, and choose Export, right like that. So now let's go ahead and let's dump out of D3. And once we're out, we can see if I open this project folder, I've got this output folder, which is where my MIDI template device is and my PJ ArtNet control is. So note, it gives the name of the project it came from, the type of thing it is, in this case, track or MIDI device, and then the name that we've been given. So I'm going to go ahead and open the project folder for Chat with Chet 09. I'm just going to make a new folder called Packages. And we're going to go ahead, select these, and drop them into the packages folder. Right like that, and now we're set up. So if we go ahead and fire up this project, and just hold for a moment while D3 loads, great. We'll hit enter. We'll right-click again, right-click on the title bar, and under versions, we'll choose import this time. And you see, I can see anything in the packages folder with the same name. And in this case, in the last hour, we've exported the Cairo ART track PJ ArtNet control. So if I select it, you can see it brings in all the DMX commands and all the tracks. So now if I choose import selected object, there we go. I now have all of those which have been brought in. This will also move things like mappings if necessary, objects, surfaces, the whole thing will be pulled across if it's needed in that track. So now if we go ahead and make a new DMX control layer, you can see, again, we have all those options. And the nice thing it also gives us, I've made boxes for these. So if I'm working on a show that only has one type of projector, I can lock it down by box for which one I want to work with. So that's a nice touch. But I pull this into almost every project I do because it's very helpful for me. So that's how we'll go ahead and move a track. Let's look at how we move a device. It works basically the same way. I'm going to click the devices plus sign. I'm going to make a new device, and it's going to be called MIDI Template. I believe that's what I called it. Its type is going to be MIDI device. And you can see it gives us this. Go ahead and right click, import, MIDI template, import selected objects. So you'll notice there's a little bug with this which pops up every so often, and it doesn't seem like anything input. But if we come over here to the edit, you can see all my control channels are there. So all we need to do is just kick it to give it the idea that, yes, there's more to you than what you're showing. So if we just click the plus sign here as if we're going to add another control set, it's going to pop everything back into place. And so now we've got our MIDI template, which we could go ahead and use if we had, say, a video layer. I can alt drag from a fader and control the brightness on the fader, control color X and color Y on those. My computer is working really hard. They just announced the Surface Book 3 today, and I'm very tempted by it. And the last thing we can do, which I use a lot, but not everyone finds a use for, is let's go ahead and set this back to self. If I pull from one of these buttons, I can use it as an on-off toggle, which I'll use as an emergency to take out objects. I did the same thing with faders when it came to both the shadow and the eye tracking for the Flying Dutchman, which I did. We basically just wanted to have a control on the surface. So if, the Dutchman shadow's not working, you can either push a button or take the fader up and take it out. And mind you, I don't like the fact that it's going 0 to 1. So if we edit that, we could actually set this to be 1 minus. We'll just pull the scale out. There we go. So now it's set up. I think this was the button I pushed. Nope, that one. So now it's set up so that when the button's off, we're at full, we engage the button, we go to our safety procedure. So just a quick little look at how all of that works. So that's really, in a nutshell, what I wanted to show today. It's a very, very quick overview of the capabilities of moving objects between D3 projects. Note that if you're going to move something like surfaces, make sure that you've got the meshes in the proper place in that object folder. Ditto with the video files. It's not going to put all of those in the packages. You need to have them referenced in the same directory as it is in the project itself. But yeah, this is a really kind of bite-sized episode. I'm tinkering with formats. We may do more of these if people find they like them because it's a quicker reference. I know Rich Porter, who I'm going to continually shout out because his work is great, has been doing his brief introductions to various disguise features and just did expressions Sunday, I want to say, which is quite good if you haven't checked it out. Also, he did some other work looking at transitions inside Disguise. But with all that being said, this is actually what I have for today. Next week, we're going to go to a much longer discussion. We'll have Matthew Houstel joining us, who is a Wizard D3 programmer who has done primarily Broadway work, but has also done some corporate. And so we should have a very fun conversation with him. But yeah, are there any questions about what we've gone over? If not, I'm going to wrap this up so that I can make the Pixotope webinar and see all of it now who are doing some really cutting edge stuff when it comes to AR and XR implementation. So, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us, and join us next week for a really fun conversation with Matthew Houstel.